Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of Interwebs History Search. We're going to check into the West Bottoms, but before we do, I'm going to look into the brick that I found. And I finally found a photo of one that is a good representation of what mine used to look like. And here's the one that I pulled out of a dirt pile. Have any luck on DuckDuckGo, but here on Google, very little luck as well, just on the normal search. And I went over to look at some images, which is obviously where I found these photos here. But however, I did find this Pittsburg Vitrified Brick Company, and I think this is what we're looking for here. Robert Nesch, owner of the Pittsburg Vitrified Brick Company, purchased the Pittsburg Paving Brick Company in about 1902. He changed the name to Pittsburg Sewer and Conduit Pipe Company and began making clay pipes. Realizing that running two different operations was expensive and very tasking on him personally, he sold the pipe company to Walter S. Dickey, who was the owner of the Dickey Company in Kansas City. Pittsburg Vitrified Brick Company paved most of the city and supplied bricks for most of the buildings built in town. So I've seen this Walter S. Dickey name before, and I can't remember where. But so they're saying here, and we've seen a lot of these Pittsburg bricks in my last exploration in the streets and sidewalks, etc. And they don't really specify, but basically they're saying that this is what was used in Kansas City for buildings and streets. And I didn't try to scroll down until just now, but I guess that's all the information we get on this. I'm going to do another quick search and see if there's anything else. Alright, so I came across this little article here, also in the image section. It's from the Patriot Ledger, January 8th, 2021. The person writing this, there's some construction going on in front of his house, and he's noticing bricks, so he was curious, and this is the article that he wrote. In 1890, Pittsburgh City Council meeting, a petition was presented requesting the council adopt for the improvement of Broadway the first-class vitrified brick for pavement at the cost not to exceed $1.60 per square yard. Two types of bricks were used on the early day streets. One, said to be one of the first, bears the imprint that resembles the top half of a clock face with minute and hour hands at the 10 minutes before 2 position, beneath which are the words Pittsburg, Kansas. The second of these is marked Pittsburgh VP&B Brick Company, or Nesch, and is one of the vitrified bricks discussed and approved for the city's streets to stand up longer than the previously used bricks, to the punishment of the steel-rimmed wagon wheels. Look at this. Somebody had one of these for sale. Looks to be melted on one side. Pittsburgh's first brick plant was built by Fred Massman, a construction man and brick mason who came to Pittsburgh in 1880 Because there was no brick readily available nearby, he purchased land just south of Quincy, where it crosses Cow Creek, and manufactured his own. Wow. That's pretty incredible that this man here, there was no bricks around, so he purchased land and built a plant and started making his own bricks. Among the many buildings Massman constructed using his own bricks that he made himself, were the Lincoln and Central School buildings and the multi-storied Globe building on the southwest corner of 4th and Broadway. And we're talking about Pittsburg, Kansas here. And the last thing we read, it was unclear as, obviously we were seeing these bricks everywhere in Kansas City, but they weren't clear on, what city they were referring to as being completely paved and built out with these bricks. Anyways, moving along here. In 1890, John Moore of Atchison came to Pittsburgh to visit friends and returned home with a basket of shale to show to Robert Nesch back in Atchison. Not long afterward, the two returned to manufacture brick for building and paving. Moore and Nesch proposed to build their own plant in Pittsburgh if the city would pave the streets with their vitrified brick. Vitrified. I keep saying vitrified. Brick is fired at a higher temperature and for a longer period of time than conventional brick, making it harder and impervious to the absorption of water. The city agreed, and Broadway was paved from 2nd to 11th with a two-course brick surface over a cinder base about 6 inches thick. This attracted the attention of other towns, and the demand for vitrified brick resulted in the expansion of the plant and construction of more kilns. That's right, everybody was crazed over vitrified bricks. When Kansas City asked various companies seeking contracts to lay a block each before choosing a contractor, the Nesch plant opted in and was chosen to pave many miles of Kansas City streets. 50 million bricks went into the KC Stockyards Company pavements. And that's actually where we saw these. So that's very interesting. Their plant, the Pittsburgh Vitrified Brick Company, eventually employed over 100 people and was one of the foremost industrial plants in this part of the country, producing 100,000 bricks a day. According to the Pittsburgh, Kansas Memories website, the Pittsburgh Vitrified Brick Company eventually paved most of the city and supplied masonry bricks for most of the buildings built in town. In addition, Nesch vitrified bricks became so well known for their high quality and durability, they were used all over the country. At one time, paved the Indianapolis Speedway. Sounds fishy. A brick speedway? Most of the city is still paved with Nesch brick, only most everywhere but in my neighborhood. Various sections west of Broadway between 3rd and Quincy and around Wynwood Street, they've been overlaid with asphalt, as is the case in most places. And guess what the asphalt looks like? Scheiße. So, and as usual, here at the end, we come around full circle. They started out, there wasn't anywhere to acquire bricks, so one man bought land and started manufacturing his own. And then down here, we're saying Pittsburgh wasn't the only city in the area to manufacture brick at the turn of the century. At one time, most cities of any size with access to usable clay had a brick plant. And this is a quote from somebody whose dad is a brick collector. So make of that what you will. That's pretty much the only history I'm finding on the Nesch Pittsburg brick. So that's enough time on bricks. We're going to jump over to the West Bottoms. It should be a lot more interesting. As most of my subscribers are aware, we are no longer looking at history through the eyes of an ignorant K through 12th grader or beyond even. We are questioning everything, but here we go with the Wacky West Bottoms. Alright, so I was having a little bit of deja vu here as I was reading this, and apparently I've already done a Wacky West Bottoms. I think that was after I shared my random old photos of the West Bottoms. But we're going to go ahead and do another overview that was pretty early on in my video making. So I'm a little more comfortable here. We'll just do a quick once over again. The West Bottoms is a historic industrial neighborhood of Kansas City, Missouri, immediately west of downtown and straddling the border of Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas. At the confluence of the Missouri River and the Kansas River, it faces Call Point, an early campsite of the Lewis and Clark expedition. The region was originally settled by the native tribes, and this spot was permanently settled as part of the French Bottoms and as early as 1800 by Francisque Chateau. And I'm pretty sure I butchered that man's name last time, and I don't care. For his trade with the tribes and early American pioneers, it is one of the oldest areas of the metro along with Westport. Its neighboring Quality Hill neighborhood is a historical center of the pioneer town of Kansas, which became Kansas City, Missouri. And we went through that already. I am remembering this very vividly now. The West Bottoms is mostly characterized by brick high-rise historical industrial buildings built in the early 1900s for major regional stockyards, train yards, and factories. Most of these were converted into art galleries, restaurants, shops, apartments, and corporate offices. Its antique shops and haunted house attractions are very popular. The West Bottoms was founded as a livestock and meatpacking district in 1871. It was home to Kansas City's Livestock Exchange, Kansas City Stockyards, and the city's first Union Railway depot. And we started my exploration at the massive brick livestock exchange building. Very impressive. And that structure did have a date of 1871 to 1910 pasted on the front of it. And I'm not sure if that is a born and expired date or what is with the two separate dates on that, but okay, I'm having a really difficult time with the tongue twisters again, especially this Pendergast name here. This organized crime family. But in 1876, James Jim Pendergast, son of Irish immigrants who had settled in St. Joseph, Missouri, moved to the West Bottoms to find employment. Pendergast lived in boarding houses and worked in meatpacking and then in several iron foundries in the neighborhood. In 1881, Pendergast purchased the American House Saloon and Hotel on St. Louis Avenue. This West Bottoms establishment served as a gambling den, informal bank, and headquarters for political organizing for Jim and his brother Tom Pendergast, architects of the Pendergast political machine that controlled Kansas City for the next 4 flippin' decades. And here's Mr. Jim Pendergast, organized politician crime boss here. You know, as these saloons and gambling and red light districts go hand in hand with this political machine. And where's Mr. Tom? Here's Tom, TJ. Tell you what, let's take a little detour. James Francis Pendergast, born 1856, expired 1911, was a Democratic politician and the first big city boss. What is big city boss? In the politics of the United States of America, a boss is a person who controls a faction or local branch of a political party. They do not necessarily hold public office themselves. So this is a puppet master, is what we're being told. Most historical bosses did not, at least during the times of their greatest influence. Finding little bits of truth within the ridiculous amount of lies. He rose to prominence in the West Bottoms as the proprietor of saloons and gambling establishments and God only knows what else. And basically this just verifies everything that we just read. We might do a deeper dive into the Pendergasts at some point, but so we go on here, you know. Oh, I wanted to check out this 1903 flood down here because I saw a little bit of information on it previously. Once again, we find ourselves on this KC His Story, Kansas City Public Library digital history site here. The beginning of the end came for the Kansas City stockyards in July 1951 when the West Bottoms suffered the worst flood in the city's history, one from which the industrial district never fully recovered. Standing on the second floor of the Livestock Exchange building, one can see the high water mark of the 1951 flood, causing nearly $1 billion in damage and the loss of lives and homes. It shocked the city, region, and nation. The destruction changed the course of history for the Central Industrial District and the Kansas City stockyards, although it was hardly the first time the Missouri and Kansas rivers had overflowed their banks in the West Bottoms. The valley where the Kansas and Missouri rivers meet has always been a flood zone, even before the area was settled. As the railroad, stockyards, and other industries arrived after the Civil Wars, their gradual encroachment on the river banks started shrinking the mouth of the Kaw River. By 1903, the width had diminished nearly by half, and 17 bridges crossed the river within a 4-mile span between the Argentine neighborhood and the Kaw's mouth. 17 bridges? My goodness. That's pretty incredible for this time frame. The area being pretty new, even at 1903. The Kansas River breached its banks on May 30th, 1903, and reached a height of 14 feet above flood stage. By the time the water subsided and the destruction could be surveyed, 19 lives have been lost. Over 2,300 people had lost their homes. 16 of the 17 bridges were destroyed, utilities were out of service, and approximately $22 million in damage had been done. So there's a little bit about the 1903 flood as well as 1951. Here they are saying that it was common knowledge that this area was prone to flooding, yet they built this ridiculous amount of industry here, which doesn't make any sense to me, but, you know, as far as my opinions go on the water flow in this place and or lack thereof now because of restrictions and destroyed infrastructure, etc. Also, my opinion that everything here already existed. Let's see. Here's a photo of the 1951 flood. And we're going to cut out of this. I'm going to look for some photos of the older flood, 1903. So down the rabbit hole we go. Just looking for some photos of the 1903 flood. And I run across, as mentioned previously, the West Bottoms was host to Kansas City's first train depot. Check this thing out. Look at this Wild West train depot here that no longer exists, of course. Why would you allow this thing to exist? Look at it. There's no describing or explaining this. But I thought that was pretty interesting and pretty awesome. And the Union Station is said to have taken that one's place. There's a pretty nice photo of it right there with the downtown behind it. We'll be investigating that at some point. But look at this thing, man. That is insane. You got your horse and buggy over here. A pile of rubble in the foreground. Dirt streets, and I guess this is a horse stable here. Which, you know, whoever built this little horse stable did a pretty good job. It fits right in perfectly here. I'm going to read a few little sentences here from this while I'm here. A lot of this is pretty much just Mockingbird type stuff, information that we've already gone over, such as the West Bottoms is one of the oldest areas in Kansas City. It sits next to the Kansas and Missouri River. Trade, Native Americans, French trappers, and the stockyards opened in 1871. Then the railroads came. So we keep seeing the 1871 date over and over, so I guess it's okay to assume that this area started around them from the information they are giving us. And this first Union Depot here opened in 1878. The grand building stood on Union Street, filled with the passengers boarding trains for distant cities. I wonder if these were some of the same passengers coming on in to get their party down and gamble, you know, check out a few pubs, maybe some women's. And in 1903, Kansas City's Great Flood destroyed many of the businesses in the area. Rail executives decided to build a new station on higher, more centrally located ground. Would I be too far out of line if I were to suggest that this area was flooded on purpose to possibly assist in getting rid of some of the things that could not be explained in his story? There's an older photo of the Union Station. You know, I think that for sure this was a rail depot. And the Union Station, I'm thinking, had more to do with, and yes, it had tracks going to it. I think both of these were standing at the same time. And I'm thinking the Union Station had a little more to do with air travel. We're going to check out a few photos here that are claimed to be of the 1903 flood in the West Bottoms. There's a ton of photos on here, some of which do not relate to this area at all. But never can be sure anyways. Everything's always looking pretty ancient and old in these photos when everything should be pretty new and shiny, I would think. We got Chicago here, St. Louis. This says it's West Bottoms. Again, look at these buildings. 1903, we're talking the area started roughly 1871. Completely built out. You know, we're talking barely 30 years here on these structures, and they look terrible. This is said to be on Union Avenue west of Union Depot looking south. And this is a 1908 flood of the West Bottoms. June again. And I'm not really finding much more here. And as mentioned in my previous video, you know, economic downturn and war, some of these industrious buildings in the West Bottoms begin crafting war materials. And then they go on about the floods down here. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to finish this off with just a quick little so-called satellite image from above. Kind of give you guys a little bit of a bird's eye view. So here we are floating in space, looking down at the West Bottoms. And that structure that I referred to as Kemper, it used to be Kemper way back in the day, but now it's a Hy-Vee arena here. So the bridge that we were looking at was under this closed road here that went over the top of it. I don't know how close one can get to these train bridges here, but I'd like to take a look at those at some point. This looks like another possible old train bridge now being used just for pedestrian traffic across the river, like the one we looked at. There's also this one we could see from where we were with the zoom, but it looks like an old train bridge. But there was one here. Oh, that's still a train bridge. Maybe it is this one. No. There's another pedestrian bridge that I was actually trying to find. And it was hard to access. The first time that I went there and got a few photographs, they might be in my old random photos. But I actually parked, I was a dummy, but I parked like right next to the highway there, which there's really no parking there. But I wasn't going to do it this time. Unless it's under the highway here, and I can't see it. I'm thinking that's the deal. Yeah, because you can access it from over here. It's another two-tier type deal, which is just pedestrian traffic underneath. A lot of that two-tiered stuff going on around this area. Which reminds me, one of my goals, or something I wanted to look into, was the big, massive, concrete-looking Art Deco bridge. Before I ended this, I wanted to jump over and look at this 12th Street Bridge real quick. The 12th Street Bridge dates back to the early 1900s when it was an iron bridge. Swept away by the 1903 flood, it was rebuilt at the cost of $75,000. A judge ordered the bridge rebuilt again in 1923, and it was reopened April 22, 1926. A 1940 fire damaged the center span of the bridge, and its wooden floor fell into the river. In about a year, it reopened after being rebuilt. And here's a few images of the 12th Street Bridge to refresh your memory. Nice little postcard here. An alleged construction photo, it looks like, from 1914 of the 12th Street Bridge. These always look really suspicious. I mean, what kind of toothpick stuff do we got going on here? And yet somehow we are crafting this masterpiece? I mean, look at this thing. If I can get a good image here. $1900s. No problemo. That's a great photo. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. This was quite the long one. I hope it didn't get too boring for you. I appreciate everybody's time, and thank you for watching.